Hello everyone, we are all well and fine. This is a continuation lecture to the last salivary gland diseases and imaging, and these were and I hope you all remember what we had discussed in last class. We identified a few salivary gland disorders based on their origins, whether they are obstructive, inflammatory, or whether they are neoplastic. In this particular, I hope you all went through lecture, and in this class we'll be going through the tumors and neoplastic diseases of salivary glands. To start off with, pleomorphic adenoma. It is the most common salivary gland tumor, and it's also a benign mixed tumor. Because it's called a mixed tumor because of its dual origin, that is both from epithelial and myoepithelial elements, and it is the most commonest of all salivary gland tumors, constituting up to two-thirds of salivary gland tumors. And the etiology of pleomorphic adenoma is not very clearly unknown. But the incidence of this tumor has been increasing in the last 15 to 20 years in relation to radiation exposure and other factors. History of head and neck radiation is considered a risk factor for development of pleomorphic adenoma. Epidemiology, pleomorphic adenoma again is the most common salivary gland tumors and occurs around 80, more than 80%. It occurs in the parotid gland and submandibular gland around 8%, and minor salivary glands about 6%. And the incidence is seen slightly more in females than in males, about 2:1 ratio, and it occurs most commonly in the superficial lobe of the uh, parotid gland. We all know that the parotid gland, or uh, if we remember the anatomy, it is distinguished into various lobes, and it occurs in the superficial lobe most commonly as compared to the other lobes. Uh, Microscopically, pleomorphic adenoma has a high variable appearance, and hence it acquires the name pleomorphic. It is characterized by mixed proliferation of polygonal epithelial cells and spindle-shaped myoepithelial cells in a variable stroma matrix, and of mucoid, myxoid, and cartilaginous or hyaline origin. Epithelial elements are usually polygonal, spindle or stellate shaped cells, which may be arranged to form duct-like structures and clumps. You would remember all this from oral pathology, which you would have uh, studied the slides of pleomorphic adenoma. And pleomorphic adenoma mostly presents as a solitary, mobile, slow-growing, painless mass, which may be present for many years, and symptoms and signs mainly depends on the size, location, and the potential to undergo malignant transformation. In parotid gland, signs of facial nerve weakness occur when the tumor is large and if it undergoes any malignant changes. Pleomorphic adenoma in the deep lobe, we told that the incidence is mostly in the superficial lobe, but when it happens within the deep lobe, it may present as an tonsillar or parapharyngeal mass, in which may be visible and sometimes palpable. There is rapid enlargement of the tumor nodule. If there is rapid enlargement of the tumor nodule, we should be concerned about it. We should immediately go for investigations and treatment without any delay, as it shows a malignant potential. And the minor salivary gland tumors might present with a variety of symptoms, including dysphagia, hoarseness in voice, dyspnea, difficulty in chewing, and sometimes epistaxis. and depending upon the site of the tumor. So the malignant changes are rare, but it is suggested clinically by rapid growth, pain, fixation to the deep tissues, and facial palsies. These are four key points. Any of these symptoms to be observed in an tumor like mass needs to be thoroughly investigated for signs of malignancy and treated accordingly. Because the treatment part for a tumor and malignancy changes altogether. The evaluation diagnosis is made on tissue sampling and radiographic studies, and biopsy procedures including fine needle aspiration biopsy, core needle biopsy, which can be done in an outpatient setting, and procedures are um, associated with very low tumor seeding rates. The fine needle aspiration biopsy can determine whether the tumor is malignant in nature with an approximate sensitivity of 90%. And core needle biopsy can is more invasive, but provides more accurate histological typing of the tumor with a diagnostic accuracy of about 97%. And CT, you can take a CT, computer tomography examination of pleomorphic adenoma. Usually appears as the margins appear generally very smooth and are lobulated, homogeneous soft tissue density. Necrosis can be observed in larger masses. A few foci of calcifications are also common. Smaller tumors show early homogeneous prominent enhancement, while in the case of large tumor, enhancement is less marked and delayed. Um, MRI can also be done, and usually the images are interpreted as T1, T2 weight images. In T1, it is usually of low density, T2 usually is very high density, and T2 weight images representing the surrounding can represent the surrounding fibrous capsule in an MRI. Ultrasound of pleomorphic adenoma characteristically appears hypoechoic in texture. They usually show a lobulated distinct border without a posterior acoustic enhancement. Ultrasound guided biopsy or fine needle aspiration biopsy are minimally invasive and cost effective procedure, and it is of a it's very helpful in terms of achieving the accuracy with fine needle aspiration. And in some cases angiography has also been considered and has been performed in um, cases of melanoma. Management previously carried out enucleation process because at its initial level can be mistaken for a cystic or a minor tumor lesion where you would have enucleated, and is followed. It is now done with complete surgical excision, and sometimes radiation therapy is used as an adjunct. So here, when we talk about surgical excision, we have to be very careful because of the involvement of the facial nerve. We all know that the facial nerve passes through the parotid gland and branches out into uh, five different branches. So preservation of facial nerve plays a very key role when it is in the parotid gland. Um, it is either treated with superficial or total parotidectomy. The superficial parotidectomy is called Pate's operation, and the second, the total parotidectomy is frequently performed, and because to avoid lower recurrence, lower the recurrence rate, and preserving the facial nerve is very technique sensitive, and tumors of the submandibular gland are treated with simple excision procedure with preservation of adjacent nerve, including the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve, the hypoglossal nerve, and the lingual nerve. When it is the minor salivary glands, of 5 millimeter margins should be obtained along with the tumor. These tumors do not invade into the periosteum. Thus, there is no need of bone resection in these cases. When tumor recurrences have occurred, they show significant resistance to treatment with the management options including monitoring only, surgery, and radiation therapy. Um, this is as far as pleomorphic adenoma goes. Apart from pleomorphic adenoma, there are various other factors, other tumors that are to be taken into consideration. I'll be telling you a few of them in nature based on their categories. So, if you category adenomas, if you categorize them as adenomas, you have pleomorphic adenoma, myoepithelioma, basal cell adenoma, you have Warthin's tumor, oncocytoma, canalicular adenoma, sebaceous adenoma, ductal papilloma, under which you have inverted ductal papilloma and intraductal papilloma, cyalladenoma papilliferum, and you have cystadenoma. In tumor-like lesions, which does not necessarily have to be tumor, in tumor-like lesions you have cyaladenosis, oncocytosis, necrotizing xylometaplasia, benign lymphoepithelial lesion, salivary gland cyst, Kuttner's tumor, you have cystic lymphoid hyperplasia, especially which is found in AIDS patients, HIV positive AIDS patients, and in some cases reactive process. And if you want to histologically classify salivary gland malignancies, then you can put it as high and intermediate grade, and you have low grade, in which mucoepidermoid carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, carcinoma developing from pleomorphic adenoma, they consist of both low grade and intermediate and high grade. And if you want to specifically talk high grade, then you have squamous cell carcinoma, undifferentiated carcinoma, salivary duct carcinoma, myoepithelial carcinoma, epithelial myoepithelial carcinoma, sebaceous carcinoma, and you have secondary tumors. In low grade, you have polymorphous low grade adenocarcinoma, metastasizing pleomorphic adenoma, basal cell adenocarcinoma, actinic cell carcinomas. So, salivary gland adenomas generally comprise of 9 histological types and 5 subtypes. Pleomorphic adenoma, like I told you before, myoepithelial adenoma, basal cell adenoma, Warthin's tumor, oncocytoma, canalicular, sebaceous adenomas. So, um, um, so we'll not be going through all the particular adenomas here, and we'll only be going through specifically a very few uh, adenomas and carcinomas when it comes to the salivary gland for our class here. And to start off with, adenolymphoma, it is found only in the parotid and benign region. And talking about Warthin's tumor, it is also known as papillary cystadenoma lymphomatosum, and it's a benign cystic tumor of the salivary glands containing abundant of lymphocytes and germinal centers. It is actually named after a pathologist, Aldred Scott Warthin, who described 2 cases of Warthin's tumor, and it's named after him. Again, it generally affects older individuals, and there is a slight male predilection, and it is highly unlikely to become malignant. It usually presents bilateral, and it generally appears along the angle of the mandible. And diagnosis is based on biopsy, and again with imaging techniques, and treatment is again excision, and radiation therapy is again used as an can be used as an adjuvant to it. And talking about adenoid cystic carcinoma, it is a rare type of cancer that may exist in different body sites. Tumor often occurs in salivary glands, but it can also be found in anatomic sites such as the breast, lacrimal gland, lung, brain, trachea, and paranasal sinus. Again, it's the third most common malignant salivary gland tumor overall, and after mucoepidermoid carcinoma and polymorphous adenocarcinoma. Um, the treatment for this is generally again surgical removal with clean margins. An adjuvant or palliative radiation therapy can also be performed in these cases. Moving on to lymphoma. The major forms of lymphoma are Hodgkin's or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The parotid gland is the most commonly involved gland again, and most of the benign and malignant tumors, salivary gland is the most commonly affected because of its size and its because of it being a mixed gland of various polymorphous cell present within the gland. So it becomes the site, most common site of origin of all these tumors. The etiology is generally idiopathic and can be caused due to long-term immunosuppression. There is a debatable this thing that it can also be caused due to radiation. Clinical presentation is generally relatively common in head and neck region, most common in middle-aged and older individuals. The mass generally appears reddish blue with the tissue ulceration and pain. Paresthesia of lip can be observed when it occurs in the mandible, and initial presentation is in the oral cavity is very uncommon. So you will not see it as an intraoral lesion most commonly. Predominant oral sites are palate, gingiva, buccal mucosa, mandible, and it may arise with lymph nodes or extranodally in soft tissue. You can observe a very ill-defined radiolucency in the bone when you take a radiographic, you try to radiographically diagnose them. And Hodgkin's lymphoma are rare in oral cavity. Burkitt's lymphoma arises in children. And microscopic findings, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma predominates almost always B cell type and varied depending upon the type and subtype cell size, pattern, and maturation level. Classification schemes are dependent upon microscopic features, and HIV, AIDS, virus associated lymphomas are typically diffuse large cell and high grade lymphomas. Diagnosis is done with biopsy, immunohistochemical studies, and flow cytometry. And staging workup involves following bone marrow biopsy, whole body computed tomography scan. Differential diagnosis is like salivary neoplasm, metastatic tumor, and soft tissue tumor. Treatment it depends upon the extent and the clinical stage and the microscopic features. A combination of radiation and chemotherapy is generally done, and surgery is not is also added as an adjuvant and sometimes performed to remove the tumor. And prognosis, it depends on the clinical stage and the histologic subtype, and patients with AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, has a very poor prognosis. Very low grade lesions usually have a very excellent prognosis. Moving on to an important diagnostic topic, xylography. To So it's a radiographic demonstration of the ducts of the salivary glands by means of injection of substances that are opaque to X-rays. The method the method is of necessity and is of limited, and it has a very limited application, and yet it may be claimed that it has added to our pathological, diagnostic, and therapeutic knowledge of our diseases of salivary glands. In practice, the anatomical considerations usually limit our field of study of the ducts of the parotid gland, and it is not very clear unless you go for very higher forms of radiographic imaging techniques. So a radio opaque medium which has been injected into the gland is found to be very and the contrast image that is produced is found to be very beneficial in terms of identifying identifying the various pathologies related to salivary gland. Indications for xylography include evaluation of the functional integrity of the salivary glands in case of any obstructive disorders that are present, such as xyloliths, and to evaluate the ductal pattern to look out, that is to look out for any strictures that can be present. Strictures can be anatomic in nature, or sometimes it can be pathologic in nature. So pathology due to any history of trauma. Anatomically, some people develop deformity where it causes strictures within the ducts. So identifying strictures and to evaluate the ductal pattern, and in case of facial swelling, to rule out salivary gland pathology, and in case of intraglandular neoplasms, that is neoplasms that occur within the gland which does not show any external signs. Contraindications are the patients who have allergy to iodine or any contrast medium that we might use for this particular technique. In cases where there are acute infection and patients with thyroid function tests, because iodine can influence thyroid function tests, and acute infection, it is not given as there is a chance, because we are going to force inject contrast medium into the salivary gland, and sometimes this can result in flaring up of the infection. So whenever there is an acute infection, it should be avoided. And when a calculi is located in the anterior part of salivary duct, because the forceful injection of the contrast dye, we should not be further pushing the salivary calculi more towards the gland or deep into the salivary duct. So it is avoided when it is very close to the ductal orifice. So the procedure generally involves in three phases. When you talk about the procedure, the preoperative phase, the filling phase, and the emptying phase. So, and what we'll do in that phases, we'll discuss a little more. Before that, we'll know what are the contrast agents used. So the contrast agents that we use for this procedure can be categorized into two parts: oil-based and liquid-based. That is fat soluble and water soluble contrast agents. The benefit of fat soluble contrast agents is it provides an excellent contrast. The retaining of the contrast agent within the gland tends to be longer with fat soluble, whereas it is shorter in water soluble agents. And the advantage of water soluble is that it can pass very easily through the different structures within the salivary gland, and hence it provides a very detailed the detailing is much more evident, and it is less painful compared to that of fat soluble, because fat soluble contrast is generally viscous, and they cause and you need to put a certain amount of pressure to get this into deep into the duct and the gland. So this causes relative discomfort and pain, sometimes even pain to the patients. So a water based is generally like not that much of a painful, and like I said before, it can fill the finer elements of the ductal system. So now let's go back. We know that there is a pre-phase, and then there is a filling phase, and there is an empty phase. The pre-phase, what we do is we inject this dye, and before injecting this dye, we take something called as a scout film. That is, we designate, depending on which salivary gland we are going to image, we designate a particular radiographic technique. So it can be a radiographic technique that is directly aimed at the salivary gland, or it can be something like an lateral oblique view, or something which focuses more on the submandibular salivary glands. Or if you want a parotid gland, it can be a rotated AP view, or more focusing on the parotid gland structures. So first we pre-designate the radiograph technique to be followed. So let us say, for example, it's a lateral oblique technique. So we take a scout image of the lateral oblique technique. Then we inject the contrast medium into the patient. How we do it, we'll discuss that further. So once we inject them, it's called filling phase. While we are still injecting, it is not like how we do an intramuscular injection. It's not done in one shot. It is gradually and slowly infused into the patient, and like I told you, it can be very uncomfortable and it can cause pain and discomfort to the patient. So it is very gradually and slowly done, and this is called the filling phase. So another image is taken during the filling phase, but the most important set of the radiographs will come during the emptying phase, and we'll be taking one image every 20 minutes, and we'll continue to do it, at least 2 or 3 4 images to compare among them, and the best of them is taken into consideration, and various level of infusion can give us various level of information. So like I said, a series of radiographs will be taken to determine the flow of the fluid and identify any obstruction and its location. Usually the radiographs taken are lateral oblique views, and OPGs are generally not useful here because of its amount of superimposition. And like I told you, the contrast medium used, water aqueous solution and oil based. Aqueous you have diatrozate and metrazolate and ioxol, and oil based you have iodized oil, which is poppy seed oil, and water soluble organic iodine compounds. So the techniques of injection, I told you we are going to be injecting the dye in, and techniques of injection, we have three different techniques: simple injection, where we directly inject, and we have hydrostatic injection, and we have continuous infusion, which is pressure monitored. In this, the infusion pressure monitored is generally needs an complex apparatus, so it is not very commonly followed procedure here. The commonly followed procedure here is a simple injection, where we use something called as a cannula. These cannulas are available in different materials previously. At least in earlier 80s and 90s, we used to have a metal based cannula for doing this procedure. But nowadays you get this disposable cannulas, which are specifically available for this procedure. But again, it is not something which is very commercially and very actively available. It is something that needs to be indented and brought directly. It is not very commonly available. So what we generally used to do in our practices previously was that we used to take the cannula that comes within a vent flam, and we used to use it as the cannula for injecting, putting into the ducts and inject the dye. The idea is that the cannula should fit well within the duct without injuring or this thing. It's very technique sensitive, inserting the cannula, opening the duct and inserting the. So for that, it is important that we understand like where the ducts are present. So the anatomical knowledge is very important here. So once we identify the duct, let it be a parotid duct or some mandibular duct, or once we do that, we do the dilatation of the duct orifices. The dilatation of the duct orifices, we have a specific instrument like a probe to dilate it. We do not use the probe which we use in for our dental purposes, because they are sharp and they might harm. We have specific probes for this, ductal probes. But the most easiest form of it will be, what we do is we tend to squeeze in some citrus fluids into the patient's mouth as a reactionary response, or a voluntary response. Involuntary response, the duct orifice will start opening well and flare up. So this is where we get hold of it and cannula into the salivary duct. So the normal xylographic appearances after we take the images, the duct for parotid gland is generally 1 to 2 millimeter wide, and the duct structure within the gland branches regularly and tapers gradually, and the appearance is tree in winter appearance, and for submandibular gland it is bush in winter appearance, and the duct is generally 3 to 4 millimeter wide. Remember, we have to understand that the salivary flow into the salivary gland for parotid gland is brought about by gravity mostly. Most of the job is done by gravity, so it has just flow in within the oral cavity. But whereas for submandibular gland, a certain amount of force is required. We discussed this while we discovered salivary gland calculi. So hence the differentiation in the ductal diameter also. In pathologic appearances, the ductal changes associated with salivary calculi and pseudocolitis. Glandular changes are associated with sialadenitis, Sjogren's syndrome, and intrinsic. So, in terms of calculi, you will see that filling defects in the main duct, and you will see that there is ductal dilatation with proximal to the calculi, and the emptying film shows that the contrast medium is retained behind the stone. So, you'll be able to identify the calculi very clearly, as shown in the image below. In Sialodocatus, you can see that you can see the sausage link appearance. This is due to dilatation and um, uh, presence of strictures within the main duct. So, if you remember sausage link, that is interconnected sausages. So, that will be the kind of appearance you see in Sialodocatus. And it's a term that describes dilatation of the ducts caused by repeated inflammatory and infective processes. And in terms of sialadenitis, you will see dots or blobs of contrast medium within the gland. It's an appearance known as sialactasis caused by inflammation of glandular tissue producing saccular dilatation of the acini. The appearance here is called the pruning of the tree appearance. And in terms of Sjogren syndrome, it is punctate or snowstorm in appearance. And widespread dots or blobs of contrast medium are observed within the gland. It is caused by weakening of the epithelium lining in the intercalated ducts, allowing the escape of contrast medium outside the ducts. In a space occupying lesion within the gland, it is the appearance generally observed is called ball in hand appearance in a xylogram, where the ducts are generally curved around the mass of the lesion. So, the adverse effects of xylography include possible complications include pain during injection, post-procedural infection, ductal rupture, extended retention of the salivary, the contrast medium, and extravasation of the contrast media, and allergic reaction to the iodine content, which may present with urticaria, dyspnea, and hypotension. So recent advances we have used, apart from plain film radiographies, we can also combine contrast media xylography with MRI, CT, and interventional xylography. So these are all when it comes to xylography. And apart from this, another developing or the most rapidly developing or upcoming this thing is xylochemistry, which is done with or salivary diagnostics, which is done with saliva collection. So saliva collection can be done in two different ways. One is directly you collect from the gland in question, the major salivary gland in question, or you collect whole saliva. Whole saliva is just that the entire mucus and serous saliva, whatever is retained in your oral cavity, will be asked to retain the saliva, and it will be procured using various methods such as draining, suction, spitting, sponging. But in and whereas in minor in if you are going to separately collect it from each and every salivary gland, you have various apparatus for performing that. For example, you have the Karl-Silk tendon collector system for Stenson's duct, where you directly inject the cannula into the parotid duct, and we collect the saliva directly from the that comes from the parotid gland. And similarly, you can use a segregator for submandibular and sublingual salivary glands. And there is something called a stimulated and unstimulated saliva. Unstimulated saliva is the amount of saliva that is organically forms in your oral cavity, that is produced in your oral cavity. Whereas stimulated saliva is after when we perform a certain stimulus. It can be an as a response to certain. For example, you can ask the patient so a few drops of citrus liquid, or asking the patient to chew gum. These are all things that can increase the whole increase the salivary flow rate. And marked salivary hypofunction is noticed when unstimulated salivary whole saliva flow rate is less than 0.1 milliliter per minute, and stimulated whole saliva flow rate is less than 0.7 milliliter per minute. So these are the images, and if you can see the above image, you can see that an unstimulated whole saliva, where the patient passively drools the saliva into the collection tube. And the image below, on your left and right hand side, you see the Carlson Crittenden collector, where you have the suction cup which is directly placed on the parotid duct orifice, and with the pumping motion, just like what you have in a BP apparatus, you try to procure the saliva. And nowadays you have DNA collectors, salivary DNA collectors, for which you have special apparatus that are produced, where once the patient drools is simulated or unsimulated saliva directly into the container. The container is coated with certain elements which separates the DNA and gives us strands of DNA right away. So we all know that saliva is a complex exocrine system with more than 60 constituents. Now, with the help of this xylochemistry, which we do with the help of saliva, we can monitor viral infections, blood alcohol level. The blood alcohol level is very prominently done nowadays. Apart from testing your blood for alcohol, saliva is also tested for alcohol. Hormone levels, screening for drug abuse, screening for cancer and HIV is way under process in development. Hence, I told you that it's a very upcoming and very rapidly developing phenomenon in related to salivary gland. So this will conclude our lecture here. Please go through salivary gland adenomas. Especially, I want you to go through pleomorphic adenoma, adenoid cystic carcinoma, mucoepidermoid carcinoma, since these are most commonly, occurring and also very frequently asked in terms of your exams. And also, please do read about xylography, and please try to correlate the xylography we have discussed here with the earlier lecture class also, especially in terms of xyloliths and obstructive and inflammatory disorders of the salivary gland. Please correlate them. That will help you in easier and better understanding of let it be the pathology as well as the diagnostics that we are performing. Um, any doubts, please post comments in the e-portal. We'll try to clarify, and we'll try to hold further discussions when we meet again during our